So let's talk about the Rita Finger article, A Theology of Welcome, the Hospitable Hidden Women of Acts 2, 4, and 6. First of all, of course, we want to talk about the thesis. The introduction is a little bit more extended than some of the others that we've seen. In fact, there aren't really strong divisions between introduction, body, and conclusion. Right? You might have noticed that. It's also kind of the nature of what this particular article is. It's not of the same ilk as some of the other ones that we've seen. So, I think I know where the thesis is. I think it's actually on the second page, which is page 32, I believe. 31. And I think it comes after this introduction of the Winnie the Pooh quote, the extended Winnie the Pooh quote. Not something that we've seen before in some of the other academic articles that we've read. I assure you, Rita Finger has quality academic credentials, but that's not what she is writing about here. So it does make it a little bit different. But I wonder. There are a couple of places where I could see a thesis. I'm not going to tell you where I think it is, for sure, but I wonder, should a thesis in your mind be the same as kind of a programmatic statement? Now, she does give us some bit of program. This is what I'm going to do first, and this is what I'm going to do second, that kind of thing. Is that a thesis, or is that a way for the writer to set an agenda? Those are different things. A thesis is the argument, what the writer is going to try to prove, what the writer is going to try to get us to understand or to believe. So some questions I had about the Finger article, which I enjoyed very much. I mean, many of these articles that we've read this time around, I've enjoyed quite a lot. Some of them more than you have, I understand that. But some questions. So when you began reading, especially when you got to the second page, into the third page, did you know where she was going? Did you understand what she was trying to get at? Did you, in the process of reading this, say, well, wait a minute, who is this Rita Finger person, and why is she writing in such a fashion? So did you look up anything about her? And if you did, you'll notice that she's involved with at least one journal that is very focused on social justice issues. And so that too might tell you something about who she is and how she writes and what she tries to bring to the table in her writing. So another thing to ask right at the outset is, what did you think about the way she sets up the article, the way she frames the conversation, right? Is it more conversational, or is it more academic in orientation? And that leads us actually to the question about audience. Who's the intended audience? I think it's pretty clear, especially when she says in the second line, right, that this is a presentation. So this is a presentation that she made somewhere. As we go through, you might, and read the article and read it closely, of course, you might say, well, oh, okay, I see where she made the presentation, or I see the kind of context in which she makes the presentation. Does context determine what a presentation or an article is like? And I would contend, in answering my own question, that yes, it does. So that when we have a certain kind of context in which we're going to be making our points, we do that with one audience differently than we would with another. With an academic audience, I speak one way. With in a pastoral context, in a church or in a church class, I speak another way. In this academic context, I speak differently. If I'm speaking with people who know the lay of the land and are familiar with the same kinds of academic questions I'm interested in, I don't define as many terms because I don't need to define as many terms. We're insiders, right? So insiders and outsiders. If you were talking to me about nursing and about maybe some of the machines that you use or some of the equipment, you might feel obligated when you see my eyes kind of wondering where what's this apparatus for, what does it do. You can tell that in someone's eyes, right, in that conversation. So you'll define that term almost automatically because you think this listener doesn't really know where I'm going with this. He or she is not an insider but an outsider. So how does that impact the way that the writer writes and the goals, right? I have, not only do I write differently or speak differently with an academic audience as opposed to a more popular audience, but my goals in writing or making that presentation are different. I want to welcome people into the discipline, but at the same time, I don't want to be off-putting because they don't know all of the language. So those are just some thoughts. So as I've done the last couple of weeks, I want to maybe just highlight a strength and a weakness. On page 34, I want to draw your attention to something that I think is a real strength. In the section last full paragraph, and that paragraph begins all these positions, and 5 lines down, it says, instead of our capitalistic, materialistic, democratic, individualistic Western lifestyle today, what would life be like in totalitarian, authoritarian, patriarchal, agricultural subsistence culture? This is a great question, because what the writer is trying to get us to do is to place ourselves in the text, to see ourselves in the text. I did my PhD at a Jesuit university, Marquette University in Milwaukee, and the Jesuits have this practice, this way of reading scripture in which they place themselves in the text. So Jesus is walking along the seashore. What does that smell like? How do I perceive him? Am I mending nets? Am I a fisherman? Am I seeing him in that way? Or am I one walking along as a follower? Have I left my nets as some of the apostles did, right? I think this has a way to help us see the biblical text in a more practical fashion. And I think that this is a strength, especially given this audience. And she talks about Winnie the Pooh throughout this article. Well, that's not something, I've never quoted Winnie the Pooh in any of my academic writing. So, not that it wouldn't be appropriate, I just haven't done it. What does that do? How does that disarm us? How does that, which I think it kind of does, how does that make us think about what she's trying to prove and how she's approaching it? This little statement right here allows us to place ourselves in the text, and I think that's a really positive way, a real strength of an article like this. Helps us to internalize the writing in a very profound way. We'll be back in a minute to talk about weaknesses.